Life stories, real moments, real emotions. What would you do if the past you thought was lost forever suddenly came rushing back? Ethan Caldwell built a successful life. But one decision haunted him, leaving Charlotte because they couldn't have children. 19 years later, at a prestigious gala, he sees her again, but she's not alone. 4 young adults stand beside her, carrying undeniable pieces of him in their features. How is this possible? What happens next will change everything. Stay with us as we unravel this emotional journey of love, regret, and second chances. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with life stories. The Lexington Grand Hotel glittered beneath the New York skyline, its towering facade a beacon of wealth and power. Inside, the grand ballroom shimmered under chandeliers, their golden light casting soft halos over the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. The air was thick with the scent of vintage champagne, expensive cologne, and whispered conversations between the city's elite. It was the kind of event that had become second nature to me. Another night of measured indulgence, polite exchanges, and the expected performance of philanthropy. I moved through the crowd effortlessly, my tailored suit a perfect fit, my posture radiating the quiet confidence I had spent decades cultivating. People greeted me with warm smiles, handshakes, and the occasional clap on the shoulder, each exchange another reminder of the empire I had built from the ground up. The weight of my own success pressed against me, an invisible yet ever-present force. And yet, tonight felt different. I couldn't name it at first. That strange unease that settled in my chest the moment I entered the ballroom. It was as if the air itself had thickened, charged with something intangible yet undeniable. A shift in the atmosphere. A tension that curled itself around my spine before my mind could even begin to decipher it. Then, I saw her, Charlotte Hayes. My breath caught in my throat. And for the first time in years, the carefully composed exterior I had mastered began to crack. She stood across the room, draped in elegance. A deep sapphire gown hugged her figure, the fabric flowing around her like liquid night. Her hair, once the soft waves I used to run my fingers through on quiet Sunday mornings, was now swept into an elegant updo, exposing the delicate curve of her neck. Time had refined her, sculpted her into something even more poised, more untouchable, but it was her eyes that held me captive. Years ago, those eyes had looked at me with love, with longing, with unspoken questions I had never been brave enough to answer. Now, they were unreadable, cool, distant, but beneath the carefully maintained composure, there was something else, something deeper. I had spent nearly 2 decades convincing myself that leaving had been the right decision. That I had spared us both a lifetime of disappointment, of watching dreams crumble under the weight of harsh reality. She could not bear children. And I had wanted a family. It had been as simple as that. Hadn't it? My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass, the crystal threatening to shatter beneath the pressure. I should have turned away. I should have walked in the opposite direction and let the past remain buried. But then I saw them. 4 young adults stood beside Charlotte, their presence unmistakable, their resemblance striking. My world tilted, tall, poised, and composed. Their features were eerily familiar, too familiar. My gaze darted between them, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was impossible. They weren't just guests. They weren't just Charlotte's companions for the evening. They were hers, and they could have been mine. A cold wave of disbelief washed over me, sending a tremor through my entire being. The realization struck like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Charlotte could not have children. That had been the truth I had built my entire life around. The reason I had walked away. The excuse I had told myself when the regret became too much to bear. So how, in the name of everything I had ever known, did she now stand before me with 4 young adults who bore the unmistakable traces of her bloodline, of my bloodline? The stem of my glass slipped from my grasp, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that barely registered over the roaring in my ears. Heads turned, murmurs rippled through the crowd. But I barely noticed. All I saw was Charlotte. And all I could think was, had I been wrong? Had I walked away from something that had been possible all along? For the first time in 19 years, I felt truly lost. The shards of broken glass lay at my feet, glinting under the golden glow of the chandeliers. But the real wreckage was inside me. My world had unraveled in an instant. And all that remained was Charlotte and the four figures standing beside her. I forced myself to move, to step forward, but every fiber of my being fought against it. My thoughts were a chaotic storm of disbelief, regret, and something else, something far more terrifying. Charlotte met my gaze, her expression unreadable. The years had changed her, made her stronger, more resilient. There was a quiet defiance in the way she stood, a strength that had not been there before, or perhaps I had been too blind to see it. I barely registered the curious gazes of the guests around us, their whispers and speculation fading into the background. I swallowed hard, my voice foreign when I finally managed to speak. Hoarse and uneven. Who are they? Charlotte didn't flinch, didn't shift under the weight of my scrutiny. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if she had expected this moment. Her lips parted, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, composed. My children. The words struck me with the force of a hammer. My jaw tightened, my hands curling into fists at my sides. My mind refused to accept it. It was impossible. No, I breathed. That's not. They are my children. Ethan. Her voice was firm, unwavering. A cold chill swept through me. It wasn't just what she had said, it was the certainty in her tone. The finality. My gaze flickered between the four young adults who stood at her side. The two young men, one slightly taller than the other, bore striking similarities to myself at their age. The young women, poised and graceful, carried echoes of Charlotte's features. It was an impossibility, a cruel trick of fate. The taller of the two men stepped forward, his gaze sharp, unwavering, his blonde hair, the shape of his jaw, the piercing blue of his eyes. It was as if I were looking at a younger version of myself. I assume you're Ethan Caldwell? He asked. His voice even but edged with something unreadable. I swallowed hard. Yes. A silence settled between us, thick with unasked questions and 19 years of absence. Charlotte turned to the others, her voice steady. This is Lucas, Nathan, Sophia, and Emily. Each name was like a nail driven into the foundation of everything I had once believed. The ground beneath me shifted. How? The question left me in a whisper, raw, broken, but Charlotte did not answer. And in that moment, I knew, this night was only the beginning. The night air was crisp as I stepped out onto the balcony of the Lexington Grand Hotel. My mind racing in an endless loop. The city sprawled before me, its lights shimmering against the darkness. But I could hardly focus on any of it. My thoughts were consumed by what I had just heard. My children. The words echoed relentlessly in my mind, each repetition chipping away at the foundation of everything I thought I knew. It was impossible. Charlotte had been infertile. That had been the reason I had left, because no matter how much we had loved each other, I had wanted a family. And yet, there they were, four young adults standing by her side, carrying undeniable pieces of me in their features, their mannerisms, their very presence. Had I made a mistake? Had I left for nothing? I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the one number I knew could help me find the truth. The line rang twice before my assistant, Daniel Foster, answered. Sir? His voice was steady, professional, as always. I exhaled sharply. I need you to find everything you can on Charlotte Hayes. Now. A pause. Then, I thought you just do it. I snapped, my patience threadbare. I need medical records, legal documentation, anything that explains how she has 4 children. Silence. Then, a quiet breath. I'll get on it. I ended the call and clenched my jaw, staring at my reflection in the glass doors of the hotel. The man looking back at me was not the same one who had walked in hours ago. Something was missing. No, something had always been missing. And for the first time in 19 years, I might finally understand what it was. The following morning, I sat in my office, staring out at the New York skyline, waiting. My hands tapped rhythmically against my desk, my mind restless. When the phone finally rang, I snatched it up before the second ring. Tell me you have something. I do, Daniel said, his voice careful, but you're not going to believe it. I closed my eyes briefly. I already don't. A pause. Then, there are no adoption records. I stiffened. No surrogacy agreements. No foster care paperwork. Nothing that suggests these children aren't biologically hers. My grip tightened around the phone. That doesn't make sense. Charlotte couldn't. She could. Daniel interrupted. She did. My heart pounded. How? Daniel exhaled. It took some digging. But Charlotte underwent an experimental fertility treatment after your divorce. The doctor leading the research was a specialist in reproductive technology. Dr. Malcolm Grayson. I frowned. The name was unfamiliar. And? He was one of the pioneers of an advanced in vitro procedure. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. You're telling me she conceived after I left? Yes. Daniel confirmed. And not just once. My stomach clenched. She had 4. I sat frozen, my grip on the phone tightening as Daniel's words settled into my bones like ice. 4 children. My children. How is that possible? My voice came out rough. Uneven. Foreign even to me. Daniel hesitated before answering. His tone measured. It wasn't easy to find. But there's a record of Charlotte undergoing an experimental fertility treatment shortly after your divorce. The procedure wasn't widely accepted at the time, highly experimental. Only a handful of candidates. I rubbed a hand over my face, trying to steady my breathing. And it worked. Yes. Daniel confirmed. Dr. Malcolm Grayson's research was ahead of its time. He used an advanced technique. Something involving genetic compatibility and regenerative therapies. But here's the thing. Charlotte's case was unique. The treatment wasn't supposed to work for her. Not completely. Not unless. He trailed off. I sat up straighter. A sick sense of anticipation twisting in my gut. Unless what? Daniel hesitated. Unless the genetic match was perfect. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I swallowed hard. You're saying, it only worked because of me? Yes. I leaned back in my chair. My entire body tense. I had spent 19 years believing that Charlotte and I had been doomed by fate. That no matter how much we wanted it, we simply weren't meant to have children. But now, I was being told that wasn't true. That it had never been true. That we had been capable of creating a family all along. And I had walked away. The weight of it was suffocating. I pushed myself up from my chair. Pacing. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. All colliding at once. Charlotte had known. She had carried this truth for nearly 2 decades. Raising our children alone. Never reaching out. Never telling me. She had let me believe a lie. Or had I been the one to create it? The truth no longer mattered. There was only one thing left to do. I need to see her. I muttered. Daniel sighed. Ethan. I have to see her. I cut in sharply, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. I barely registered the drive to Boston. The city blurred past me. My mind a storm of emotions, anger, regret, confusion. By the time I arrived at Charlotte's townhouse, night had settled over the city, casting long shadows against the brick exterior. I hesitated for only a moment before knocking. The door creaked open, revealing a young woman, tall, poised, with sharp blue eyes that mirrored my own. She studied me with cool detachment before arching an eyebrow. You're late, she said, her voice laced with quiet disdain. I swallowed, my chest tightening. I need to see your mother. She crossed her arms. And if she doesn't want to see you? I met her gaze evenly. Then I'll wait. The air was thick with unspoken words as I stood before them, before Charlotte. Before the 4 children I had never known. Their expressions were guarded, their emotions a storm I could not fully decipher. I had come seeking the truth. But I had found something far more profound. A lifetime of moments I had missed. A family I had unknowingly abandoned. I owe you all an apology, I said, my voice quieter now, rough with emotion. No one responded at first. Nathan crossed his arms. Sophia narrowed her eyes. Lucas remained impassive. And Emily, the quietest of them all, simply stared. I took a slow breath. I should have been here. And I wasn't. I can't change that. But if there's even the slightest chance that I can be part of your lives now, I want to take it. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, finally, Noah exhaled and exchanged a look with his siblings. We'll think about it, he said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was something. And for the first time in 19 years, I felt hope. The weeks that followed were slow, careful steps towards something new. I didn't push. I didn't demand. I simply showed up. Conversations that started as hesitant turned into something real. I learned their interests, their dreams, their fears, and in turn, they learned something about me too. One evening, Charlotte stood beside me on her balcony, watching the city lights. "We can't be what we were," she said softly. "No," I agreed, "but maybe we can be something else." And as she met my gaze, I saw it. A flicker of something almost like hope. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories.